Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the AIIM Growth Partners podcast. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Leena Parmar, the founder of Citrus Connect Recruitment, the specialist in direct sales recruitment. Leena, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me, David.
No, my absolute pleasure. I am going to be very sparing and have avoided giving too much of an introduction to yourself, Leena, as I would rather kind of hand over to you to do so. Could you, take us on a bit of a journey over the last sort of 17, 18 years as you've been building the business? Yeah, I'd love to hand over to you to introduce yourself.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. So my name is Leena Parmar. I'm the founder and CEO of Citrus Connect Recruitment. Founded the company in 2009 after I saw a gap in the recruitment marketplace for self-employed direct sales personnel. And with no recruitment experience, I decided to fulfill that gap in the marketplace, and here we are 15 years later.
Amazing. Apology, I got the kind of the timeline mixed up a little bit there, and I probably was going to try and take you a little bit further back. So you mentioned you didn't have any recruitment experience. I know you came from more of a retail and fashion background. So let's start there first of all. How did you identify this problem, and what kind of made you transition and think, you know what, actually I'm going to solve this for a problem in an area that you didn't necessarily have expertise?
So I started my career, as you said, in fashion. Fashion is and always will be my first love. It's something that I've been passionate about from a really, really young age. So I developed my career to the point where I was an area visual merchandiser for a high street retailer, traveling the world, loving my job. And then I ran into some personal circumstances, which left me in a position where I was personally looking for work. And it was, it was interesting to see how recruitment companies were working at that point. And then as the more research that I did into the industry, I just found this gap in the marketplace just through sheer research more than anything. And it was something I saw a potential opportunity with for a business and decided to dive in. I am just driven that way, give me something challenging to do and I'll be up for the challenge. But in terms of entrepreneurship, I think it's also in my blood, if you like, because my father was an entrepreneur. Both my grandfathers were entrepreneurs. So I come from an entrepreneurial family. Um, Typical immigrant family where my dad had the corner shop in the local village. So I've grown up with a very strong work ethic in my environment, to the point where my dad, the only day off he had was Christmas Day. So I know what hard work looks like. And I think if you're going to set up a business, if you don't have that strong work ethic or a desire to serve, then I think that you're starting on the back foot when it comes to setting up your own business. So it was twofold, really, personal circumstances, seeing a gap in the market, and then I've always had the desire to have my own business because of my family background. And it all just, all the stars aligned in that moment, and here we are.
Oh, that's fantastic, and I appreciate you sharing that context there, because I think that's so important, as we probably discussed off air. But one of my previous guests I had on was talking about how she's built the biggest recruitment business in the Balkan regions, and one of what I really liked about her story was about that kind of context of her parents before her giving all the unrest in the region. It was a necessity for her parents maybe to be entrepreneurs, whereas for her it was a bit more of a luxury, or it was a bit more of a way of creating, building up from that and creating more of kind of a lifestyle and opportunity. So I think that context and understanding that almost hereditary aspect, or that ingrained work ethic, I think is so important. So at a high level then, you identified the problem in the space, you set up a business looking to solve this problem. So talk me through, the kind of the early years, finding product market fit's probably not the best. You've already validated that there's a problem, but talk me through those first years, because I imagine there's probably a lot of uncertainty there, particularly entering into a new market. So talk me through those first 3 years and what you encountered.
That's a really interesting question, mainly because I started the business in a recession.
Of course, yeah, financial crisis as well.
Absolutely. So we had a big financial crisis in that moment, and but I made it. And I think in entrepreneurship, I think there's a lot of spiritual language going on at the moment, in terms of consciousness. And I do feel that there is a lot of transference with that language into business. And one of them being when you're an entrepreneur or an employee, do you have a consciousness which is service to self or a consciousness which is service to others? And I think from the very beginning, because of the foundations that my father set in the beginning of his entrepreneurial journey, it was very much about service to others. So once you've got that level of consciousness or that heart of service, I think things become, even if you're in a recession, if you come from the right heart and you come from that heart of service, you can't but succeed. And so for the how I started the company was I just gained my launch clients. And fortunately for me, it was the Automobile Association, which in the UK is, it's a massive company. And I worked really closely with the sales director to build his sales force. So we grew his sales force by over 200% within an 18-month period. And I did that working really closely with the sales director, but also whilst working closely with him, just perfecting the recruitment process, perfecting, efficiencies and making it more efficient and proficient in terms of how do we find the right people in the right places who are going to stay in the sales force. So it was less about just filling roles, but more about building a sales force with him. And I have to say, I worked with the AA for about 4 years before I even thought about getting another client, which might sound really ridiculous to an entrepreneur who wants to go fast. But I really wanted to understand the market. I really wanted to understand what our competitors doing. And not that I looked sideways. I never really look at what competitors doing. I very much go with, well, what can we do to solve this problem? And because when you look at competitors, I feel like it stops you from thinking outside the box. Whilst if you just look at the problem with no preconceived ideas, actually the fact that I had no recruitment experience, I felt worked in my favour.
I think that's so interesting, and I really loved. I'm trying to kind of weave it all together, because I think the philosophy kind of component to your story is so interesting. And when we're talking about, comparing ourselves with competitors out there, I think, let's be honest, LinkedIn has just become another form of social media. It's very much that carefully curated image that people want to see. And I think it's so easy to get distracted by what, competitors doing in the space and the new logos they've won and the deals they're doing. But, you don't see the other end of things. And I think that was working in recruitment myself in the past. That was one of my kind of frustrations. I very much more preferred developing really good relationships with people. And I think what I've noticed with a lot of businesses, the recruitment model is win as many accounts as possible. Everyone has to be a 360 consultant. If you're not bringing in new business, you're gone. But in terms of new business, expanding accounts and, strengthening those relationships, getting intros into other hiring managers and recruiting for different departments, that's not classed as new business, which is crazy for me. I think, you've done a great job of, me kind of buddying up with someone that's good at kicking all the doors down, but maybe the client can't stand to work with, and me going in as a bit of a softer, familiar face, a bit of a slower burn, developing that relationship and aligning to each kind of person's strength. I think that's a much more aligned with my approach, but not what LinkedIn maybe portrays, or a lot of what the competitors seem to be doing. So I think that's so interesting, your focus on specifically that one client and really serving that client whilst you mapped out and learned the market. So talk me through then, after that kind of 4-year period where you did start branching out and looked at other clients, was it sort of overnight, right, I'm going to go out to everyone, or was it slowly but surely sort of steady growth over the next following years?
I'm always a slow and steady type of person. I'm a risk taker, otherwise I wouldn't be an entrepreneur, but I'm a calculated risk taker.
Yeah.
And although it took me, 4 years to start thinking about, expanding the client base, it's because I was doing so much work with my launch clients. But strategically, what I was also doing is building a story. I was building a story. I was building an infrastructure. I was building processes because I had to offer something different in the marketplace, but not something different for the sake of being different.
Yeah.
It was being different with results to back me up, The marketplace pays for value. And I think a lot of people forget that sometimes. And nothing shows your value more than results. And stats are my best friend. Data is my best friend. And I wouldn't have been able to create an infrastructure or standard operating procedures to the level that I have to almost guarantee recruitment success for my other clients had I not worked so hard on that one client, working really closely with that sales director. So once I'd done that and I'd got a kind of intellectual property that we were building, workforce planning tool, which enables me to go into a client and almost ask them what are their challenges with their current sales team, what are the obstructions to their business growth, and how can recruitment help in that. And once we have those discussions, we use our workforce planning tool to be able to plan their recruitment strategy. Had I not done that over those initial years, I wouldn't be able to have that intellectual property that we have now. So once we've created that intellectual property, it was then just about one client at a time, building that relationship, making sure that the workforce planning tool is working for them, then moving on to the next client and the next client. And now, we work with a lot of the major players out there who have a self-employed sales force, and we work with our clients for a long time. Had it not been for AA disbanding their direct sales force, I'm sure we would still be working with them.
And I guess it's interesting when you're going to other clients as well. I can't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head. I hadn't noted them down, but I think it was roughly 80 odd salespeople when you started with AA and grew it to like 200 plus, right? So when you've got that case study versus I think maybe these spot hires, a lot of the other business we want to work with every, I don't know, whatever vendor in the IT space or whatever area they're recruiting in. If you've placed one CRO, one VP of sales, and maybe a marketing person at one business, it's hard to create a template or a templatized process and an SOP that you can go to another business. It's much more credible saying, hey, I've grown this sales team by 200%, and that's not taking it from 2 to 4 people, or 2 to 6 people, whatever, 8 people. That's taking it from 80 to north of 200. This is how we do it. If we're going to work together, this is what I need from you. And I guess overcoming one of those big challenges in recruitment, that it's sometimes seen as working with a recruitment partner is seen as a nice to have, not a necessity. And I think it's so easy to get kind of beaten around and pushed around, by a client that hasn't bought into your process, whereas you've created a bit of a slower burn, but you've created a methodology, an SOP of like, we can get these same results for you, but this is how it's done, and probably ultimately gives you a lot more control of the process, would you say?
Absolutely. It's surprising when I meet a potential client or start working with a new client, how much of their recruitment data they just do not know. We're very data driven at Citrus Connect, so we can give real-time data of your recruitment journey, your recruitment conversions. I can forecast how many interviews you'll need to do to get the number of salespeople that you need. I forecast how many people we would need to speak to at Citrus Connect in order to get those amount of salespeople. That's how much data we're constantly working with. And when I go into companies and sit down with the sales directors and really look at their workforce planning, they don't track. That data is not tracked in the business, which is astounding to me, because without that, how are you possibly building your sales force? For me, recruitment is about being proactive. And a lot of the recruitment that I see before we go in is very reactive recruitment. I have this in sales, they say ABC, always be closing. In recruitment, it's ABR, always be recruiting, because that's how you're going to build an elite sales force. You've got to be able to know who it is that you're looking for. The other astounding thing for me is how many people, sales directors know who their top salespeople are. But it's like, what profile are we working towards? What have we built an avatar or avatars on your top sales performers? So we really understand, what is it about these people that are making them succeed? What's the common factor? And can we somehow bring that into the recruitment process so we can identify that and constantly be adding to the elite sales force that we have? Because a lot of the times, when it comes to crunch time, some clients will just, we'll give them a go, see what happens. But the cost of that mishire is nearly like, I think it's 30 to 135 times someone's salary. the cost of a mishire. And I'm not just talking about money, the morale in the company, the lost productivity, recruitment cost. There's so many costs associated with a mishire. So I think, having data, knowing your recruitment conversions, the recruitment journey conversions, being able to do a good workforce plan, but also know who it is that you're looking for, are two crucial bits of information that I think companies today are really lack.
And that's really interesting, in particular that kind of data-driven approach. Having obviously worked in recruitment myself and in sales roles as well, I think it's quite often the case when you have top performing sales reps or recruiters or whatever, and no one really knows the process they're doing, and they're almost in their own little silo, not sharing kind of their best practices. And the reality is, I mean, I remember when my first proper sales job, I was based in Liverpool. I was working with a lot of cheeky scousers who could get away with saying things that maybe I couldn't say. I naturally didn't like sales as much, didn't think I was any good at it. And my first, approach was, let's just mimic what everyone else is doing. So there's me trying to adopt a Scouse accent and get away with some of the things that my colleagues were saying. Obviously, that did not land at all. It was awful. So it's about creating something that, taking their best bit, but also aligning it and creating some sort of authentic pitch, something that aligned with my customer first sort of mindset, but maybe being a bit cheekier, maybe being less formal than I was. But I think that's one of the biggest problems I see, or I've noticed in working in sales environments, that everyone's so siloed off and there's no real data, there's no real sharing and democratization of best practices. And if you're getting 5 or 10 different agencies making spot hires into a sales team, there's probably going to be much less cohesivity amongst the sales team versus you're coming in and you're offering a workforce augmentation or hiring solution. There's probably much greater chance that you're finding people that are going to be speaking, are going to be sharing best practices, and minimizing the risk of one agency's kind of made a hire above the one you've just placed, and then all of a sudden everyone's leaving because his methodology or his approach is entirely different to everyone else's. Or maybe a senior salesperson leaves and then it's the domino effect, everyone's wiped out. So it sounds like your approach in that data-driven aspect is really like a value add to your clients as well.
Yeah, that, and also the database. A recruitment business is nothing without its database. And I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions when it comes to recruitment agencies and clients' apprehensions to work with us. Because in their mind, they think, well, if all I have to do is put a job ad up on Indeed or Total Jobs or CV Library, and why am I paying you to do something that I can do? But they totally miss the point. Yeah. Yes, we do some of that. We're a recruiter, so it would be silly not to do that. But the gold of working with a recruitment agency is you have access to people that you wouldn't normally have access to. And I think that's the point that a lot of clients miss when it comes to working with recruitment agencies. We're not just here to do something that you could do. We're here to give you something that you otherwise would not have. The database.
And I think it's interesting. And I was going to kind of come on to the trends you're seeing in the market, but I think particularly when I was working in the tech space, all of a sudden it's gone from being a very candidate short market and candidates king to then actually the market's been flooded with good talent, and all of a sudden it's having to reframe the role of a recruiter from, yes, you're getting hundreds if not thousands of applicants for your job, so no more is it about getting consistent sort of flow of candidates through. It's about finding the best people. And I think in sales particularly, you want the best people, and they're not going to be people who are actively looking and actively applying for roles. They're probably going to be people that are comfortable because they're the top performers, they're the top sales reps. No one's going to want the bottom of the barrel. So I guess in terms of your positioning, how have you noticed, I guess, that trend? If it's the same in sales, that there is an abundance of great talent, how are you finding that your positioning is maybe affected or altered by that?
Yeah, I mean, the marketplace, there's lots of different nuances in the marketplace at the moment. Ultimately, we have a slight increase in unemployment. We have a cooling labour market where job ads are decreasing, vacancies are decreasing, employer confidence is decreasing, and you have a surplus of people who need jobs. But within that, you've got a massive problem, which is skills shortage. That's the biggest problem at the minute. And that's why people are finding it hard to fill roles. And that's why candidates are finding it hard to get jobs. And it's not because the skills, you don't have the skills or the sales skills. Yes, that's part of it. But I also think sales as an industry is changing. And the skills that were required 10, 20 years ago in sales, it's a different set of skills now. Even sales is very data driven. You need a certain level of IT proficiency when it comes to sales, and you need relationship building skills as well. So I think there's this huge need now for soft skills in sales. And that's where I feel there is a massive skill shortage when it comes to these salespeople as well. So the marketplace is really interesting at the moment, where the skill shortage is just like the underlying issue that all businesses are having. What we do at Citrus Connect is we're constantly building a database of what we call elite sales professionals, and we're in constant communication with them. We all always come from a heart of service. So we're not one of these agencies that would poach a candidate who's working for one of our existing clients. We're just not going to do that. And I know a lot of agencies, as soon as they've placed somebody, after 3 months, they'll call them again and say, how's it going? Are you looking for something else? But we just wouldn't do that, because we come from a heart of service. But those people who are the top salespeople in some of our clients' companies, at some point, they're just going to want something new. And it's not anybody's fault. It's not because they're not enjoying it. It's not because they don't like the company. Sometimes it is. But sometimes it's just, I've done this for 5 years, Leena. I love it. But I'm just ready for a new challenge. Those are the people that our clients are missing out on, or any client is missing out on if you don't work with an agency. I think working with a recruitment agency in business now, it's very much synonymous with, I believe, each business should be working with a marketing agency. It's, like you said before, clients think our recruitment agency is a nice to have. And as a business owner, I used to think a marketing agency is a nice to have. Now, having worked with one for about a year, I realise it's actually a business necessity. Marketing is just so key to the success of any business. So I do believe that a recruitment partner with any business is so key, because without good people, you do not have a good business.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting in stressing and trying to form a partnership in a heavily commoditized market where, unfortunately, do have, whether it's some of the bigger companies or some of the more desperate companies, maybe it's businesses with lower overheads that can afford to, how do I put this politely, price compete, and are pushing the prices down and out competing maybe some of the large ones. And you're getting hiring managers thinking, hey, I would have previously worked at 20%, 15%, whatever it is now, but so-and-so is offered to work at 8%. So I'm going to go with them because they're cheap and I don't really understand the difference in service. You've got the top talent. They say they've got the top talent. Don't know what the difference is. So I think it's interesting, that sort of challenge. And I guess that's where your case studies come in, and the long, having really invested a lot of time and effort into individual clients, building up really robust case studies, not a case of we've built sales teams for 50 companies over the last 5 years. It's, here's our proudest case studies. We stay with you, and we stay with you for your growth journey. That's probably what's going to separate you from, I guess, many of the other businesses out there.
Yeah, I would say so. And I kind of come back to this notion that a recruitment company for any business should not be a nice to have. It should be part of your business plan, because talent is just so good. Talent is very difficult and challenging and very competitive at the moment. But, combined with that, I think the other thing that clients forget about is the marketplace knowledge that recruitment agencies can offer. In a competitive market like we are in at the moment, where people are fighting for good talent because there is this skill shortage, if your job positioning is incorrect, you're not going to attract the right talent. So, you need an expert on your side that can look at your job and say, this is not competitive enough. And I'm not just talking about salary, not just talking about OTE. I'm talking about the whole package. I'm about the candidate experience from the time that they apply for the job.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? I think I don't know about you, but when I was working in quite a niche area, I didn't send the job descriptions to candidates often, because I developed enough of a rapport with them where they were just saying, hey, I trust you. If you're calling me up, and you're saying it's a good opportunity, just tell me where I need to be and when I need to be there. And the reality is there could have been some of these big consulting houses, for example, who would put very little time into actually writing the job description, because they might be hiring 50 people to do the same sort of role. It's very generic kind of copy and paste. And I was like, this isn't going to get anyone excited. And I would sort of say that in a polite way to the client as well, and say, right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to sell them on the opportunity, get them bought in, because unfortunately, if I send them this job description, they're going to be turned off before they even, enter into the role. And I think that's one of the kind of value adds, as you mentioned. And circling back to a thing you mentioned before that I think is really interesting, and I think it's quite refreshing, is the emphasis on soft skills at the moment. And I think it's interesting looking at the kind of the origins of the CV and how maybe there's a need. I don't know who's going to solve this problem, but I think that the role of the CV needs to sort of evolve, particularly as we need more soft skills. How do we emphasize that, and how do we draw them out on a CV? We can't. I guess the CV by nature is the hard skills, the accomplishments. And it's so important that people look beyond that and look at the intangibles, look at the soft skills. And I guess echoing what you said before, that's one of the real values of working with a recruitment agency, speaking to the people day in, day out. Can this person corroborate what they're saying on a CV? Because now, particularly with AI, everyone can write a killer CV and they can come up with legitimate or fraudulent, evidence to sort of back it up, which inevitably is going to waste a lot of time for hiring managers. But working with an agency, I guess you can cut through a lot of that noise and you can tell their story. You can mask the job description, or if the company's not positioning the job right in terms of OTE or the mission or whatever, you can jazz that up and get the candidate more excited.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just coming back to the CV, it's interesting that you make that point about AI and CVs and how somebody can write an amazing CV now with what's available. But on the flip side of that, you'd be surprised how many badly written CVs are actually amazing candidates. And again, if you're not working with a recruitment agency and you're just relying on job ads to fill your vacancies, because you've got time constraints. So as a sales manager, your job is not a full-time recruiter, but for some it turns into that because of the amount of CVs that they receive per job. Because you've got a lack of time and lack of capacity to deal with all the applications, you're automatically going to not call the CVs that don't look great. However, but because we're talking to sales professionals day in, day out, we have got sales professionals referring other sales professionals to our agency who not even have a CV, or if they've got one, it's really badly written because they just did it for that one job that they were applying for. So if you're just going for well-written CVs, you're missing this whole pool of candidates who are great at sales but just not good at writing a CV.
And once again, I guess back to the point about proactively headhunting the market, engaging the people who aren't actively looking for work, but presented with the right opportunity. You're speaking to these people on a weekly or a monthly basis saying, hey, I know you're pretty happy where you are. What would it take you to move? Okay, fantastic. I found the right opportunity for you. These aren't people if you then say, oh, actually, by the way, could you rewrite your CV from 5 years ago? I know you've been like a top performing sales rep here, but rewrite it and specifically target these points. You're never going to get that. It's going to be a massive hurdle. And inevitably, they're going to be able to discount the top sales talent who aren't rewriting their CV every sort of 6 months or so.
Absolutely. But yeah, I mean, it's just the whole CV writing thing. There is a whole podcast to do on that as well, Dave. I did a podcast with a friend of mine in Latvia, actually, and we were talking about the possibility of blockchain and employment history and how that could link in together. And I really think that could work, and it could literally eradicate CVs if we could just have it on a blockchain or something. But that's another conversation for another day. But I definitely agree there needs to be an alternative to CVs for sure.
Yeah, well, let's. I'll get myself to work and hopefully crack the code on that one. Whether it's blockchain, probably beyond my capabilities, but I'll see if I can come up with anything else. But one of the things we mentioned off air before this call that I wanted to bring up was this idea of employeepreneurship. And you've mentioned your kind of roots, your heritage, and the importance of that entrepreneurial spirit in you and your family. Talk to me about this idea that you mentioned off air of employeepreneurship, what it means to you and how you, I guess, instill that in your employees, your team.
I mean, I think the idea for me, it comes from the notion that everybody thinks that the only way to earn a lot of money is to be at the top of your game in whatever you do, or be an entrepreneur. And that's what I want to challenge. And I want to challenge people's mindset when it comes to how you look at your work. Ultimately, your boss, the person who owns the business that you work for, is looking for 4 things. And these 4 things will make a business succeed no matter what. Can you help that business retain existing clients? Can you help that business get new clients? Can you help that business with good talent? So can you refer good talent to the business? And can you help that business reduce costs? And that could be physical costs, or it could be improving efficiencies. Now, I'm not saying that everybody needs to go above and beyond their job role, but within your job role, you can do those 4 things. And I think that mindset of employeepreneur for me is looking at your job through the eyes of your boss, and it's going back to that shift in consciousness when it comes to work. Are you working in service to yourself, or are you working in service to others? And for me, an employeepreneur is someone who is always thinking about those 4 things in everything that they do in their job role. I'm not saying you need to work extra hours and help bring in new clients. I'm saying within your remit, what can you do to give such good experience that people will just keep referring business to your business? What can you do when you spot good talent, or when you've received good service in a retail outlet or the local bakery? What can you do to say, really enjoyed your service today. If you're ever looking for work, please give us a call, because we're always looking for good talent at the business that I work with. Are you, when you go to the stationery cupboard at work, are you stealing a couple of pens to take home? Do you know what I mean? It all comes back to seeing your job as an entrepreneur, and that I would call an employeepreneur, where it's a consciousness of service to others instead of a service to self.
And that's so interesting that, philosophy was not something that kind of interested me in the slightest until, I guess, recent years. And I read a couple of books. So I don't know if you've heard of Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl.
Yes.
So combining kind of Eastern philosophies with Ikigai, the Japanese one, I think it's interesting seeing the kind of the parallels, and then looking at, older like Marcus Aurelius, for example, but looking at the kind of common themes across that, and you think, actually, wow, it's amazing how much of that kind of holds true today. And as I really appreciate you sharing the kind of the heritage and the story there, because I think it's something that's quite often missed. Back to what we were saying with social media and with LinkedIn, we look at that quick fix solution, we look at what's here then and everywhere else. And I think it's interesting, refreshing and sobering hearing your story and your kind of stance on entrepreneurship. Obviously, I'm much earlier on in my journey, and I think it's, at the end of the day, there's probably 100 things I can criticize myself for, but reminding myself of those 1 or 2 things that have gone well, I think that's really important. It does feel at times that I'm just doing a load of pro bono work for people in terms of kind of referrals, connections. And like with these podcasts, there are a lot of guests I have on and say, hey, look, what does your ideal client look like? What partners are you looking to bring on? Because chances are I'm speaking to leaders in the recruitment space, leaders in the technology and cybersecurity space on a daily basis. Chances are there's going to be some sort of overlap there. And although in these instances, I'm not kind of monetizing it, it's like, okay, right, these are all the things that went badly today, but these are things I did right. And I think in the long run, feeding off what you said there, that will sort of prevail. You're doing the right thing. I guess that will come back. As an employee, it was more focused on what's my KPIs, how much revenue do I need to do, how many clients do I need to bring in, how many CVs do I need to send. I wasn't thinking about the bigger picture of how much value can I bring to whether it was the cybersecurity ecosystem or whatever else. That was a tagline, that was a phrase, but it wasn't something we necessarily lived by as much. So I think that approach is really nice and something that definitely resonates with me, having gone on to that journey myself.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating is you can always tell in an interview the type, whether that candidate is a service to self or a service to others type of candidate. And I find it fascinating that at the end of an interview, if I say to somebody, have you got any questions? There's always questions, about pay, annual leave, and, what benefits are there, and this, that, the other. But the questions you should be asking is, tell me more about the vision of the company. Tell me more about how the company started. tell me more about the person who did this job before me. What were they good at? What were their areas of development? What could they have done better? Can you please tell me what you would be expecting of me on a daily basis? Can you please tell me, for me to exceed your expectations and be the best employee that you've ever had, what is it that you would like to see from me? They're the types of questions that an employeepreneur asks. The other questions are what a service to self person asks.
That's so interesting. I think it's something that's been a really fortunate step for me. I've done podcasts for a number of years, but obviously only since setting up my own business have I been focused more on that founder CEO level. And I think it's so interesting working in recruitment in the cybersecurity industry. It's like, oh, it's another cybersecurity vendor. It's another cybersecurity business. You forget about the story. You forget about the journey and the mission. And that's what, really on the podcast, whether it's recruitment leaders or cybersecurity leaders, it's like, what was the problem you set out to solve? What gap did you see in the market? What's your story? Particularly when some of these businesses reach like lofty valuations, it's so easy to forget that it started with a mission, it started with risk, it started with uncertainty. They might now be up at some grand valuation, but it all started with that. Mm. And I think realizing that, it's, as I said, incredibly cathartic for me speaking to leaders and owners who, might have come sort of 5, 10, 20 years before me, and realizing that's how and where they started. I don't consider them on the same level at this point because their valuation is here and mine's down here, but we all started in the same way. And I think that shift in mindset's obviously been great for me, and it's interesting sort of seeing that in other people.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what's important has also changed. I think what companies should be focusing on has changed as well. So I think good candidates will ask relevant questions that are relevant to the marketplace today as well. Talking about things like, so what is your sustainability policy? It's asking about their, social policy. It's all of those questions about everything that's relevant, not just economically, but politically, as well as what the marketplace, what the nuances are in the marketplace as well.
Yeah, because it's so much more than just a job and a paycheck. And I guess that's where people aren't asking those questions, and all of it's around OTE, holidays. I think particularly in sales roles, there's probably always alarm bells are ringing when it's how much time do I get off? How much is the bonus and how much is the sick pay and whatnot?
Sales job, it's a good question to ask, but ask it after you've been offered the job. These type of questions are still relevant. I'm not saying don't ask them, just there's the right time to ask them. And at the end of your first interview is not the right time to ask it. Once there's a job offer on the table, then it's like, okay, negotiation time now. What's my bonus? What's my holiday pay? Your job offer's there. They like you. They want you. Now use the questions for your benefit.
Yeah, don't jump the gun.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, look, I think to kind of wrap up, I know I could speak to you for absolute hours, but it'd be interesting sort of understanding is you're looking into this kind of next stage or phase of growth of your business, and you're looking ahead forecasting. I know you like the data, you've got all the data there. So as you're kind of forecasting and looking ahead over the next few years, where are you going to take the business? Where's, Citrus Connect going to be? And what are the kind of the main initiatives and kind of projects that are going to drive you there?
I think the main initiatives are driven at the moment by the marketplace and the trends that are happening. And we're in the process of just building a new manifesto for the business and looking at what value do we truly add to our clients? Is it the database? Is it the retention focused recruitment that we do? Is it our data driven approach? But for me, more importantly, right now, the biggest thought on my mind when it comes to the Citrus Manifesto is how do we build a sales force for the future? That's the thing that's on my mind at the minute. That's the thing that I want to crack. When it comes to my clients right now and future clients, are we future ready? Are we ready for the future when it comes to building your sales team? And that's what people should be looking at. It's, yes, we're building for now, but are we future-proofing your sales force as well?
I think that's so interesting, particularly I know in sales where people probably want that job tenure. They want all the results. They want the people that have stuck at a company maybe for a number of years and demonstrate success in an industry. With all these kind of new changes in technology and AI and whatever else, maybe some of these people that are maybe a bit more seasoned are going to be a little bit more resistant to changes. So I guess that's going to be a big sort of challenge for you. And I guess finally, what's your advice for people out there, business owners or employees that are considering this entrepreneurial journey? Obviously, a lot of what we've spoken about is you were destined to set up a business. You talked about your heritage, about your kind of parents and grandparents being entrepreneurs, how you were driven into that, how that's something you instill in your team and, the candidates you place with your clients. What would your advice be to people out there that, either are founders already and are grappling with all that imposter syndrome and all the other kind of negative emotions, or people that are looking to maybe take that leap? What would your, main piece of advice be?
My main advice is come from a heart of service, from a conscious perspective. And the second piece of advice is make sure you know your data. Yeah, make sure the numbers tell you everything you need to know, and you can map out your business if you know the numbers, and the numbers will tell you how to grow it. The information is there. We just choose to, as entrepreneurs, we choose to ignore it because we just want to move forward or feel like we're moving forward and not really taking a reality check on actually what's happening. And we go on a gut, and gut is still important. I still rely very heavily on my gut, but always with a backing of data. So I always have all my data in my back pocket to help me make any decisions I need to make. And that served me well.
I think it sounds so simple when you distill it down to that, just data. The data doesn't lie, and, acting in service to others. I think they're fantastic lessons for people out there. If anyone, any of the listeners here, do wish to kind of connect, whether in a kind of a recruitment capacity, looking for advice, what's the best ways of them kind of getting in touch with you, Leena?
So LinkedIn or Instagram, and Citrus Connect website, which is www.
Amazing. Well, look, Leena, it's been an absolute pleasure. I've really enjoyed the conversation, learning about your journey, or I guess jump into the recruitment space with no prior experience, and you've done incredibly well. Didn't even mention you've won a number of awards for Best Direct Sales Company, I believe it was in 2022, and won a number of other awards as well. Obviously, testament to your approach, your ethos, and also the entrepreneurial spirit you instill in your employees. It's been an absolute joy having you on the podcast, and I've really, really enjoyed our conversation.
No, thank you for having me. I've enjoyed the conversation thoroughly too.
My pleasure.